Oh, okay. So the recording has started. Um, so let me give brief introductions of our speakers. So happy to have Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, and he's a West Point graduate and 25-year Special Forces veteran. Colonel Aguilar joined the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which many of us might be familiar with, but quit after witnessing war crimes, including the shooting of unarmed Gazans at food distribution centers. And he has devoted his time since then as a whistleblower on these activities. And Dr. Alice Rothchild is a JVP Health Advisory Council Steering Committee member. She's an OB/GYN physician, author, filmmaker, and longstanding human rights and social justice advocate. She has helped curate the regular Health and Human Rights Report, written 3 books on health and human rights in Israel-Palestine, 2 Palestine-focused novels for children, and a memoir about becoming a feminist physician. She also works with We Are Not Numbers, a mentoring program for Gaza youth. So, let's take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to start and let me just share my screen. Okay, and let me make this. um, okay, so I'm going to be talking about something called Reprocide, which is the destruction of the ability to reproduce for a society, and looking at the collapse of care for women and children under the Gaza genocide. So I just want everybody to be on the same page as to the level of catastrophe. So over 69,000 people have been killed and 171,000 injured in Gaza, and all experts agree that this is an underestimate. And the majority of those killed and injured have been women, children, and the elderly. So it's currently thought that 12% of the population has been killed, injured, or detained. What this translates to is one child killed every 52 minutes. And if you look at the different months in which all of these deaths have been counted, between 83 and 96% of deaths are civilians. Another way to look at this is that the bombs dropped on Gaza are over 8 times the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's 67 kilograms of explosives dropped per person in Gaza. So the level of catastrophe is immense. And more than 447 people have starved to death, including 147 children. More than 90% of the population has been displaced at least once, and there are many people who've been displaced 5, 10 times, and they find that there is no safe place to be displaced to. In terms of children health, one example is that half of the vaccination centers were destroyed. And there are currently 150,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women urgently in need of nutritional support. So on October 10th, a quote ceasefire, which I will call a partial ceasefire, and a prisoner exchange occurred. So the question is, has there really been a ceasefire? And the answer is no. Since then, over 250 Gazans have been killed and 650 injured by the Israeli military. The Israeli military controls approximately 58% of Gaza, and that is the east side of Gaza, which is the fertile agricultural area. Bombings, demolitions, they've all continued. Rafah, which is the city in the southmost portion that goes into Egypt, still has not been open. And a new problem has been that the Israeli government has made a new registration system for non-governmental organizations, which is challenging and very invasive. And 99% of the applications have been rejected. So NGOs that want to help can't get permission. If you look at the ability of Gazans to grow their own food and take care of themselves, only 4% of the cropland remains undamaged and accessible. 11% of the orchards, and 9% of the agricultural wells. So this is a catastrophic decrease in the ability to grow food. I don't know if you noticed, but last week there was a massive rainstorm and massive flooding, and it was reported raw sewage flooding the tent camps in Gaza, making another health catastrophe. And overall, almost all the housing, 84% of the medical facilities, all of the educational facilities, the water, sanitation, and hygiene structures have been damaged or destroyed. And in this process, there is more than 50 million tons of rubble, and much of it is toxic, and there's no ability to deal with it right now. There was something that Anthony will talk about more called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is an incredible misnomer, which was the center set up by Trump to, quote, feed people in Gaza, which was actually a killing field. And he will talk more about that. But that has collapsed, although now they're building more centers. So he'll talk more about that. So since the quote ceasefire, there has been basically a trickle of food, educational elements, medical equipment, drugs, reconstruction, field hospitals. They're being built, but really, really at a trickle. And in terms of just basic housing, in terms of tents, Gazans have received 5% of the 300,000 tents that were promised. Now, in terms of the aid, approximately 227,000 metric tons of aid, three-quarters of it food, have been cleared by the Israeli authorities and then denied entry. So there's this vast array of stuff available right at the borders that cannot get in. And what kind of things have been denied? Fresh meat, educational supplies, solar panels, mobile latrines, refrigerators, water treatment parts, tents, things that people need to survive. 55% of the medications are at zero stock. And there was a report in The Lancet, which is a prominent medical journal out of the UK, that said most victims were civilians and more than 1 million life years have been lost in children less than the age of 15. Now, there are particular issues for the approximately 50,000 women who are pregnant. The main thing women were responsible for and continue to be is obtaining and cooking food, which is an immense challenge, particularly because there's no cooking gas, there's no clean water. They struggle with issues around hygiene and shelter and getting health care, and then just family and personal safety. Many, many women are caring for displaced family members and orphans, and there has been an increase in gender-based violence, often through family pressure around obtaining food and also on online platforms. So under the guise of offering humanitarian aid, like food or money, there are men who demand sexual favors and images in order for the women to get money. And what we see is sort of a collapse of the society. The official aid channels have been disrupted. There's this reliance on these informal online networks, and women are being targeted via social media. And these women are very vulnerable. Many of them are widows, single mothers, displaced young women who've lost everything. And as one woman said, I'd rather die than accept help from people like this. We are a people with dignity. Now, pregnancy is a particular high risk for women. This is a picture of a woman who has just delivered in her tent. So if you think about it, if you're pregnant, there are huge mental health stressors. There's almost no prenatal care being offered. Women are living in a toxic environment, which endangers themselves and their fetus. They are chronically malnourished, sometimes to the level of starvation. They have massive issues around safety, both from the war and from gender-based violence. And the issues all culminate at the time of delivery and postpartum. So for women living in the rubble or in a tent, going to a hospital could risk getting killed on the way. And if you get to the hospital, there may have been a mass casualty event and no one will pay any attention to you because half the people there are dying. If they stay home, then there's no one to attend to them who has any skill set. So birth is a particularly risky time. Gazan women have traditionally breastfed their babies, but if you've been starving and hungry and dehydrated, you may not be able to breastfeed. So and you have to obtain formula. Formula is hard to obtain. It's expensive, comes as a powder, and then you have to mix it with water, and there's no clean water. So there's a huge crisis over feeding newborns. Between January and July, over almost 500 deliveries took place outside of hospitals, some attended by paramedics, some attended by the husband or the grandmother or whoever. And it's notable that the birth rate has plummeted 41% over the past 3 years. But you got to remember that if a baby is born in a tent and dies, that baby may never have been counted as well. The experts are currently reporting a 68% pregnancy complication rate. To show what Reprocide means in its most poignant situation, at the beginning of the war, the Israeli military destroyed the only IVF center in Gaza and killed 5,000 embryos. There are also 700,000 women and girls who lack menstrual health items, which means that every month menses is a time of challenge and privacy issues and shame. Now, I wrote medical complications pre and post because the healthcare system wasn't that functional before October attack. And so we're talking about a healthcare system that was already on life supports and now has been pushed over the edge. So since the genocide started, people with untreated chronic diseases, people who need dialysis, people who need cancer treatment or have disabilities have largely gone untreated. And in this really terrible hygiene situation, there have been lots of new infectious diseases. There's a new deadly viral strain that's COVID-like. There's an upswing of Guillain-Barré, which is a paralytic disease. People with chronic upper respiratory infections, untreated hepatitis A. Almost the entire population has watery diarrhea. If you have hypertension and diabetes, it's largely gone untreated, and that's particularly dangerous in pregnancy. Diabetics are not able to monitor with testing strips, and there's no insulin, or the insulin you've got it, but you have no way to refrigerate it. So all this creates a mental health problem, what they're calling chronic trauma fatigue. So this is a state of emotional numbness, of just feeling like the world has lost its meaning. Your personality is undergoing an internal fragmentation, and it's very hard to live under those conditions. All of this has had a major impact on pregnancies. There's a rise in spontaneous abortions, congenital abnormalities, stillbirths. 20% of pregnancies end in preterm labor, and there's an increase in low birth weight. And then there's an increase in maternal and fetal mortality. Now, the nutritional crisis, you've got to remember this is a man-made famine, and famine still exists. It's a little less, but people are still very hungry. And again, big impact on pregnant and breastfeeding women. If they go to try to buy food in the market, if they have money, food is very expensive and scarce. And prior to this partial ceasefire, much of the food was taken out of trucks from hungry crowds or looted by armed gangs who were protected by the Israeli army, and then they would sell the food at high price. Before the quote ceasefire, people were surviving on an average of 1 meal a day. It's now an average of 2 meals a day, which means that some people have less. The other thing is that there's no dietary diversity, so there's all sorts of nutrient lacks. And as I mentioned, there are miles and miles of aid trucks unable to enter with hundreds of tons of food and meals that could feed the entire population for months. And in August of 2025, a group called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Analysis, is a big word, but it's basically a group that works with the UN and UNICEF and WHO and the World Food Program. And they monitor the level of food insecurity. And they said that phase 5 was triggered at that point when 3 critical thresholds were breached: extreme food deprivation, acute malnutrition, and starvation-related deaths. And so they said you put this all together, and this is a situation of famine. So we've backed off a little bit from that, but not very far. 43% of pregnant and breastfeeding women were malnourished in July, and that was up from 16% in March. I think the numbers are slightly better now, but not by much. Again, putting pregnant women and their newborns at high risk. Now, in terms of what the Israeli military is allowing in, back in July, the average was 70 trucks a day. It's now about 90 trucks a day. In the ceasefire agreement, the agreement was more than 600 trucks a day. So it's grossly, grossly too little. And the other horrible thing that's going on is that what's in these trucks, 90% are Israeli goods for sale and not humanitarian aid. And the picture on the right is actually a group of Israeli protesters trying to stop the food trucks from going into Gaza. 61% of pregnant women and new mothers were screened at 2 clinics in Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah, which is in the south, in August, and they were malnourished. So those are the pregnancies that are delivering now. And it was estimated that there would be 640,000 people at risk for starvation by the end of September, and 1.4 million in phase four, which is the step right before you're in famine. The predictions were that pregnant and breastfeeding women were at risk of death from starvation by mid 2026, and the surge was going to be from 17,000 to 55,000. So, unless there's a dramatic change in the amount of food available, this is going to be happening maybe at a slightly lower numbers. And another list that I found of food that is being blocked by the Israeli military are eggs, meat, fish, dairy, fruits, vegetables, nutritional supplements, nuts, supplements for pregnant women, and special foods for people with chronic illnesses. This is the kind of thing that's being prohibited from entering Gaza. Now, women need to go to clinics and hospitals, and as we all know, these hospitals and clinics were deliberately targeted by the military. So, two-thirds of the hospitals have been destroyed. The remainder are barely functional and way over capacity. More than half of essential drugs and almost more than two-thirds of the essential disposables are at zero stock. Another study looked at the 28, quote, functioning hospitals and field hospitals in Gaza. And it's important to remember that Gaza was a major center for medicine and Gaza City, and accounted for a third of the inpatient bed capacity, almost half of the ICU beds. And we know that the Israeli military has been systematically destroying and leveling everything in Gaza City. So this is going to have a much bigger hit on the healthcare system. And if you think about the doctors and the nurses and the physical therapists and everybody working in a hospital, they are depleted, they are overworked, they're traumatized, they're hungry and starving, just like their patients. Many of them have been displaced or injured or killed. And there have been reports of surgeons fainting in the OR because of lack of food. And we know that healthcare professionals have been targeted. By June of this year, 1,580 healthcare professionals had been killed and 300 were detained. We know that they're detained in Israeli prisons and often tortured. This kind of catastrophe in terms of staff and hygiene and availability of drugs has produced a rise in multi-drug resistant infections, which then makes it much harder to take care of people who are infected. If you look at the number of beds for emergency obstetric care, there were 13 sort of field hospitals, 9 neonatal intensive care units for a population of 2.3 million people. If you have something that really is needed to be transferred outside of Gaza, which is most things at this point, it's almost impossible to get out. And our government halted a temporary visa program obstructing Heal Palestine, which is one of the big groups getting people out. So in this really challenging, catastrophic environment, we have midwives and doctors providing care as best they can. Now, if you look at medical journals, in the United States, medical journals have been almost totally silent. Most of the data comes from the UK. So this is an example of the kinds of things you can understand from the UK. And this was from the Lancet, which is again the British medical journal. So they looked at the first 6 months of 2025, found live births declined 41%, that 2,600 pregnancies ended in miscarriage, 220 resulted in intrauterine fetal death, and 21 newborns died within 24 hours. And sometimes that's because there's no electricity and they can't keep the beds, the little heated beds that they put the newborns in warm. I mean, just basic stuff. They found increasing premature births, congenital abnormalities, and low birth weight were very common. And what they wrote, which was very powerful for, a medical journal, and quote, pregnant mothers experience malnutrition, repeated forced displacement, and increasingly limited access to health care, as well as dire living conditions where water, sanitation, and food are severely deficient. History will record whether the world chose to preserve Palestinian life and stop this genocide. Gaza's mothers cannot wait for a more convenient moment to claim their right to give birth safely. And several months earlier, they had the Lancet, this is another example of the kind of things that they write, had computed the life expectancy for females, and they found that it was down by almost 30 years. They lost a third of their life expectancy. And they noted our approach to estimating life expectancy losses in this study is conservative, as it ignores the indirect effect of the war on mortality. Actual losses are likely to be higher. So, what they're saying is they're only counting people who were killed at the time of the bombing and brought to the hospital and were identified in the hospital. But if you lose your leg and die a month later from infection, that's not counted. So that's the indirect effect of the war on mortality. And the impact of famine, this is a statement from the Integrated Food Security Phase classification. They said they officially declared a catastrophic state of famine in Gaza earlier this year. And they noted, although some aid has begun to trickle into the Palestinian enclave, since the quote ceasefire, experts say the famine could fundamentally alter Gaza for generations to come. And I have one more slide, which is not going forward. Whoops. Okay. And this is a statement from the UNFPA, which is the population and family group that works with the UN. Famine is a death sentence for pregnant and breastfeeding women and their newborn. For mothers in Gaza, it means being forced to give birth while malnourished, exhausted, and at heightened risk of death. It means their babies are born too small, too weak, or too early to survive. It means mothers unable to breastfeed because they too are starving. And it forces mothers to make the impossible choice between which of their children to feed and which must be left to perish. 1 in 5 babies are born prematurely or underweight. 1 in 7 newborns need emergency neonatal care. Children who survive will be marked by stunting, developmental delays, weakened immunity, and increased risk of adult chronic disease, ruining the health of Palestinians for generations. And that is really what is meant by Reprocide. And I'm just going to end with this slide in terms of the struggle to survive and rebuild. Just so you know that there is a huge amount happening. There was a pilot initiative launched by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN in May that is providing aid to farmers because Gazans need to be able to grow their own food. Just as an example of what the UN has been able to deliver, and you hear how Israel is going after UNRWA, declared it a terrorist organization. They are now cutting off all electricity and water to UN facilities. But on November 20th, there were almost 5,000 pallets of aid that came in through the UN and its partners that actually got into Gaza. Almost 2/3 of them were food supplies, a quarter of them were shelter, water, hygiene, and sanitation was 10%, nutrition supplies 3%. I mean, people are working hard to do this and make it happen. And there were 123 truckloads offloaded from 2 of the checkpoints, Karam Shalom and Zikim, which is along the eastern border. We see that health partners are continuing to provide life-saving health services, even in this totally challenging environment. Immediately once the quote ceasefire was announced, they started a catch-up child immunization campaign to try to get kids immunized, whether they've never been immunized or they've gotten behind in their immunizations. In terms of water and hygiene, the UN was able to connect 19 shelters to the UAE water line in southern Gaza, and it's nearly completed. And now they're repairing the sewage pipes in Gaza City, which is absolutely critical, and the stormwater outlets. They're getting stormwater, believe it or not, to go back into the Mediterranean, which is what was going on before, and they fixed that. But now that's better than having raw sewage running through your tent. There are also a lot of efforts on mental health. The UN has a mental health and psychosocial support group, and they have fixed and mobile teams that are going out into the population. The Gaza Community Mental Health Program, who has all of their facilities have been bombed, and they keep setting up these temporary facilities, and a number of their staff have been killed. They are working. This is all happening, but it is not enough. Thank you. So, Anthony, it's all yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? All right, I'm going to attempt to
Yes.
see if I can share my screen. Is my screen sharing?
Yeah, but we're not seeing your slide. You're just sharing your desktop. You have to bring up your slide.
Okay. So if I have it, let's see. So, oh, I see. How about now?
Yes, good. And if you just put it in the presentation mode, we'll be good.
Okay. So everyone can see the slide?
Yes, we can see it, but it's not in the, yes, go right ahead.
Okay. So as was introduced in the beginning, reiterating the level of destruction and what is the reality on the ground in Gaza. You know, this is the southern portion of Gaza City, and 70 tons of bombs, or 70,000 tons of U.S. bombs, have been dropped on Palestinians in Gaza. There's not one bomb, there's not one mortar round, there's not one tank round or artillery round that is not provided by the United States. The level of destruction you can see with that 50 million tons of rubble that exists. If we were to start today with removal efforts and reconstruction efforts, it will take until 2050 before the area is livable or hospitable again in its totality. In When we talk about a genocide, it is absolutely a genocide by definition as determined by the United Nations, but also by definition by our own laws, by U.S. Code of Laws, Chapter 18. It's clearly stated what the conditions are met for a genocide, and this is that. In addition to that, it's also an ecocide. When you consider the amount of toxins and um, poison gas and remnants that remain behind into the water system, into the open sewage that has been 90% of Palestinians live on like actually physically on flowing or near open running sewage. And with the rains, the recent rains, and there's no longer any infrastructure to hold the ground in place. It's just rubble and mud. And now all of that is washing away with sewage and nowhere to clean yourself, no fresh water. This is a man-made disaster on so many levels, and the United States is inherently a part of it, not only directly with the supplying of U.S. munitions, but also in our intervention attempts, like, for example, this ceasefire. The ceasefire that was agreed upon on the 10th of October was not a ceasefire. It was not a ceasefire that was intended to last, nor was it a ceasefire that was put in place to last through the implementation of what is now UN Resolution 2803, the peace plan. The ceasefire was a 72-hour ceasefire with the intention for the release and the exchange of hostages, with the desire to hold the ceasefire in place through negotiations. And Israel violated that almost immediately. The bombing continues. The combat operations along what's called the yellow line, and I'll show that in another slide. That continues. And so when you look at this slide here, this shows, can everyone see this slide with the map of Gaza?
We can see it.
Okay. So if you look at this slide here with the Israeli militarized zone under displacement orders, this is as of August and really carried through into the ceasefire. All the red is the area that was completely under IDF control, completely under militarized control, evacuation orders in place, displacement orders. All surviving Palestinians in this area, in these areas, were concentrated and pushed into the areas that you still see in white, where combat operations were then going on through those areas before the ceasefire. The 4 yellow dots you see, those are where the GHF had their 4 distribution sites. When the United Nations and UNRWA were operating in Gaza, there were, imagine those yellow pucks, there were 400 sites. 400 sites from the north to the south, from the west to the east, in every area called community-based outreach humanitarian assistance, where they would operate in the areas of need: food kitchens, medical assessments, veterinarian assessments for animals, and for the agrarian culture with beasts of burden, the need to care for the whole of society. Now, under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, up until October 10th, there were 4 sites. And at those 4 sites, as you can see on the map here, they're all located just inside that Israeli militarized zone. So any Palestinian that seeks food from these sites has to cross into the militarized zone. That inherently created a situation where you have unarmed, starving civilians on foot in vast numbers of tens of thousands, going to these small sites where there was once 400, going through a militarized area where the IDF are conducting combat operations. And this is what site number 4 looked like from the perspective of standing just outside the site, looking towards the site. This would have been standing in Barish, looking north, crossing Wadi Gaza, right in front there where that dilapidated sign is. And then you can see these cages, cattle cages is what they look like, and pretty much what they are. And this massive flow of unarmed civilians to these sites in a very uncontrolled manner.
Can you advance the slide? Advance the slide.
Can you all see it now?
No.
No, you're also not in presentation mode. You're just in.
There it is.
That's good. And if you could go into presentation mode, we can then see it bigger.
Yeah. Okay. I thought I had it in.
No.
Well, we can see the slide. We can see.
We can see it. Just go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So when you look at these sites and how they were designed, the sites themselves, because they were in IDF controlled territory, the IDF controlled these sites. So humanitarian aid and humanitarian assistance should follow 4 core principles that are sacred to humanitarian assistance, humanitarian aid: independence, impartiality, neutrality, and humanity. The aspect of neutrality, independence, and impartiality, you immediately are in violation of those principles, because you are putting these sites entirely under the control of the Israeli military, of the IDF, and not necessarily IDF logistics or sustainment forces, but combat forces around these sites where Israeli tank battalions, infantry battalions, not far from this site, further north into Gaza City, was the area where Hind Rajab was killed along the Salah ad-Din road. That road going, you see where these people are massing on, is the Salah ad-Din road. Site number 4 was put on the Salah ad-Din road, which is a major thoroughfare through the entirety of Gaza. And that same battalion that was responsible for the killing of Hind Rajab is the same battalion that operates near and on the outside of these distribution sites. So the distribution sites were put in areas intentionally that were designed to draw civilians into the IDF combat zones. There were other places to put these sites. These sites could have been placed in the areas of need. These sites could have been placed in areas along the corridors where there was not military activity or combat operations ongoing. The best solution would be to, continue, restart and continue the United Nations and UNRWA. UNRWA was delivering 550 to 600 trucks every single day to sustain the population. That wasn't a surplus. That was to sustain daily. During the time of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and their short stint until until October 10th, they were operating with only bringing in 12 to 18 trucks a day, sustained, on a good day, some days less. And now with the ceasefire and the IDF's allowance of more aid in, we're still nowhere near the minimum requirement to sustain the population. And humanitarian aid and humanitarian assistance at scale for an entire population is much more than just food. It is water. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was delivering no water. No water was provided to any of the Palestinians because it wasn't in their contract to provide water. So humanitarian assistance and the delivery of humanitarian aid encompasses water, food, vaccines, medicine, sundries, hygiene products, blankets, cooking fuel, fuel for generators, everything that the population needs to live, because the entirety of Gaza is under IDF occupation. And this is another view that I was showing you on the Salah ad-Din road coming towards the site again. You can see the entire area is overwatched by Israeli forces. This is a picture that I took, another that I took on the distribution site with, thousands of Palestinians packed into those metal chutes, trying to get aid, fighting to get in, with UG Solutions personnel, contracted personnel, firing stun grenades at them and shooting at them and harassing them with tasers and riot batons and stun grenades and tear gas, simply for getting food. No one is armed. And this happened at all of the sites. So what's important to also understand is that everything that goes into or out of Gaza, everything from doctors to UN workers, to aid workers, to reporters, to aid, anything, to include UG Solutions contract personnel, GHF personnel going in and out, is controlled by an organization called the Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories. It's an organization called COGAT. And this organization under the Israeli government belongs to the Ministry of Defense. So it is a military agency that is responsible for the entire area. And the people in charge of this organization, who are in command of COGAT, you have an Israeli commander named Major General Ghassan Alian and Brigadier General Hisham Ibrahim. Both of these individuals have conveyed the same rhetoric that you hear from Smotrich or Ben-Gvir or Netanyahu, in that kill them all, starve them all, that all Palestinians will be removed. They control everything that goes into Gaza. If you look at this last slide here, you see these zones. This is what many of you will hear about when you hear about the yellow zone or Israeli controlled zones. So the blue zone is what remains as of now with the ceasefire and the implementation of UN Resolution 2803, the Peace and Prosperity Plan, the adoption, of Donald Trump's 20-point plan. All of the blue area, that is absolutely under complete IDF control. There are no Palestinians that live within those zones. IDF absolutely control it. You can see that that also gives them control of all of the gates, all of the crossings, all of the entries, and direct access from the entire west, north and south, and to the east. The red zones, these red zones are areas that are completely, absolutely, utterly destroyed. Total ruin. There is nothing left. And they're also extremely dangerous because of unexploded ordnance and rubble that is unstable. And then within the green area is where there was heavy bombardment, and it's still accessible under certain conditions by Israeli military vehicles going in and out. What is happening now as part of this new Peace and Prosperity Plan is that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, so on October 10th, when the ceasefire was was established, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation overnight, literally overnight, one period of darkness, tore down their 4 sites and left Gaza. No accountability, not having to answer for what was done. And now GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, has renamed itself under this new Peace and Prosperity Plan called Q2 Impact, a new company. But UG Solutions, the contract company that provides the armed security guards, is still operating and are now actively recruiting to man 15 sites. And those 15 sites will all be along the boundary of the red zone and the yellow zone in Deir Bala and Khan Yunis. So once again, establishing aid sites in the area of military combat operations, where once again, the civilian population will be at risk of being fired upon, bombed, hit with mortars, killed in any way imaginable. And that's happening as we speak. That has been kind of the premise of my speaking out and going to Congress and speaking to as many people as I can to make them aware of that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation did not provide humanitarian aid. And I've explained this to congressmen, and I'll explain it to you, that the plan for the distribution sites, the plan for the GHF, and how the distribution sites would operate to put them in a position of total control of key areas within Gaza City was never about delivering humanitarian aid. The plan that was developed for what Netanyahu and what others have called the day after plan, the plans by the Boston Consulting Group that laid out where the site should be, were planned in 2021. So in 2021, the plan for a private entity to provide humanitarian aid by establishing themselves in certain geographical locations within Gaza is not something that came about because it was discovered that the UN and UNRWA were infiltrated or compromised by Hamas. This was always part of the greater plan to have humanitarian aid taken over by a private entity. Where this has further implications in my mind is that now that USAID has been dismantled, there is no American international aid organization that operated in that way, because UNRWA is specific to the Palestinian territories. So now in areas like Sudan, the Congo, Western Sahara, Ethiopia, Somalia, where USAID operated, is no more. Is the future privatized humanitarian assistance, humanitarian aid, which in its very organization and how they're designed cannot meet the demand at scale for humanitarian aid because they're a profit-based mechanism. You cannot do humanitarian aid and humanitarian assistance at scale when it's controlled by a profit margin. It doesn't work. So what we're going to see here in the next 2 weeks, because the UG Solutions and the new Q2I Impact are already doing open recruiting. They're recruiting for up to 1,000 armed contractors. And within the next 2 weeks, they will go in and establish these 15 sites. And once again, we will start to see these almost daily reports that came from doctors in the various hospitals, that came from Palestinians themselves, that came from reporters of more Palestinians being targeted and killed at these distribution sites by the exact same company working under the exact same structure of Kogat and controlling. And if you think about it, when it said that Israel now controls 53%, that's the blue zone. When you consider what's also within the red, where the IDF are deployed to, and then also having reconnaissance forces and engineers and combat forces in the yellow, they're still in control of the entire territory. It is not 53%. It is still upwards of that 83% pre-ceasefire. In fact, the total control, the blue zone, has grown. If you look at the Netzarim corridor up there where between Gaza City and down to Barij, that was once only 4 kilometers wide. Now it's 8 kilometers wide. So in the implementation of the ceasefire, Israel actually gained more territory under their complete, unquestionable control. So that's where the state of affairs are now as the implementation of this peace and prosperity plan goes in. And the US-led Civil Military Control Center, it was called the CMCC, that established in Kearney, right near Kearney Crossing during this period of ceasefire / negotiations, that's now being pulled out. An international security commission will come in, and that board of peace will be headed by Donald Trump. I really don't understand. It's still something that I'm looking into, how that's going to operate with the President of the United States as the chairman of the board for something of this magnitude that requires expertise, doctors, humanitarians, pediatricians, water experts, engineers. Like, to me, what I fear what this looks like is a real estate venture. And from what I've seen thus far, all the way up to today, that is what it is starting to look like to me, from having experienced working with these organizations, from seeing how the area in Gaza is being divvied up. Those areas in yellow where Palestinians will be moved out of. That's the plan right now, is for Palestinians that have survived this in the yellow areas will be displaced into the red. And then those areas of yellow will be starting to be taken over for rebuilding and reconstruction efforts. So it's very hard to get your head around, my head around at least, other than this being a real estate venture. So I'll end my comments there, and any questions.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so very much, Alice and Anthony. What a, sobering description of the current situation in Gaza. We are almost at the top of the hour, so I think maybe if people can hang on for another few minutes, maybe we can entertain at least one or two questions. And again, thank you so very much for your comments. Uh, the one comment that there is in the chat is somebody has said, it's so depressing. I'd really love to hear suggestions for a path forward. So I'm wondering, maybe Anthony and Alice also, where do you think we can apply pressure? And what do you think can be done to, even in the immediate situation, make things somewhat better?
So let me just start with a few comments. I think the first thing I've noticed is that Gaza has really dropped from the headlines. Like most people are, out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. So the first thing people need to do is to stay on top of this kind of information, which you can do by reading the Health Advisory Council reports, by reading Mondoweiss, Electronic Intifada, Al Jazeera. It's all there. And then I think we need to pressure our media and our social media to keep Gaza in the forefront of people's minds. I mean, there's so much going on, and it's just pretty much been forgotten. And for instance, the UN just passed a recent, the Security Council resolution, which is basically a mandate for US colonialism in Gaza. And there's been almost nothing. So you need to be aware of this and then speaking out, writing letters to the editor, putting it on social media, that kind of thing. And we also have action items in our urgent reports. So look at what those are and please do them. There are more people in Congress that are supportive of this. We know that over half of people in the US are supportive of ending aid to Israel. We need to keep pressuring Congress. And then there are our health institutions and our journals that have been totally silent. So if you are in a healthcare institution, this is the time to be putting pressure on having the institution speak out. The journals have articles, that kind of thing. And then I think there are groups like that are actually providing physical aid. And again, the numbers are small because Israel's not letting things in. But I know that Doctors Against Genocide, Doctors Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, ANERA, and UNRWA have been able to get food and aid in. And so supporting those is a useful thing to do. And I think it actually succeeds in bringing aids in. There have been, I don't know if you saw the recent article that cryptocurrency has gotten very popular in Gaza because there's no cash. So people can't, even if someone wires money to the Bank of Palestine, they can't get the money out to go buy chicken, So people are using crypto. And I'm not suggesting to use crypto, but that's just a level of the catastrophe that to get cash out of your bank account to go buy market money, stuff in the market, you have to use a merchant that comes in from Israel who has cash, who takes it out for you and takes a 50% cut. So the idea that we need to figure out how to support people's ability to get aid and to do that through international agencies, I think is really important. Oh, and the World Central Kitchen also, yeah.
Thank you. And Anthony, do you have any response to this or?
Yes, I echo all of which Dr. Rothchild said, and I'll add, information and education. Yes, a lot of what's been happening in Gaza in the past has dropped out of the headlines. However, it's kind of like when a pot is boiling over and you quickly turn down the heat and it subsides, but then it starts to matriculate up again when the heat comes back. That's going to happen with attention on Gaza because Israel is losing control of the territory in terms of being able to keep eyes out, so to speak. The crime scene is open. International peacekeeping force that goes in, there's things that they will see that cannot be denied. And what I'll say for us, for interested human beings, for Americans, UN Resolution 2803, read it. It's not very long. Read it yourself. And as you look into it, you will see that it puts the United States in a position of custodianship over Gaza for 2 years. This is colonialism. There's no other word for it. The Palestinian people don't need custodianship. They need rights and self-determination. So if you read 2803, if you're a student of history, you will see that it sounds a lot like the Treaty of Versailles or just a modern version of the Balfour Agreement. It's atrocious. So familiarize yourself with it, but then also contact your congressman. I spend so many days out of every month up in DC, and I live in North Carolina, but I head up to DC and I knock on doors, and I have 3 demands when I talk to my representatives, either in the Senate or in the House. House Resolution 3565. That one is block the bombs. If your representative, if your congressman is not on that, demand that they do. Demand it. That is the block the bombs is to stop the U.S. from providing offensive weapons to Israel. They don't need offensive weapons. HR Resolution 473 and 935, these 2 resolutions are for the U.S. to push to ensure that timely, needed, appropriate, independent, neutral aid go into Gaza, meaning that would cut the GHF and these privatized entities out and reinvigorate and reinforce the UN. We need that, and we have to demand that from our congressmen and women. And right now the Senate isn't going to do much on it because these House resolutions haven't passed. But having gone to see senators and congressmen over the many months, just ad nauseum, House resolution gets passed. It can then move into the Senate for a joint resolution. Then the U.S. can actually, the legislative branch can actually start demanding this from the executive branch. But right now, with no resolutions in the House and nothing coming out of the Senate, the president is fully within his rights to execute executive orders in this. And that's what the proposal for the 20-point peace and prosperity plan was, that the UN adopted in its entirety in UN Resolution 2803. So educate, inform, and act. Like it seems daunting, but it really isn't. If I can figure it out, anybody can figure it out. I mean, I'm not educated in governance and the processes. I read it, I go to Congress, I get an appointment, and I ask, why haven't you signed on to block the bombs? And if they tell me, well, give me a reason, then I tell them, well, that doesn't sound like a good reason to me, Congressman. So these are things that we can all do, and it will make a difference. It's just going to take all of us.
Yeah, so thank you very much for those comments. I think we need to wrap it up, but one thing that I wanted to bring out, one of the comments here from Sam Bahor, is that let's not forget about the West Bank. What's happening in Gaza, and they're now beginning to ramp up and have been doing for a while in the West Bank. And there's a link in our chat to the latest Human Rights Watch report about now the targeting and the decimation of Palestinian villages and the people in the West Bank. So that's, very important to also remember that this is part of the same campaign. It's part of the same process. It's just an extension of what's been happening in Gaza. So I just want to make a quick announcement about our next upcoming webinar and to thank our speakers again. This has been absolutely tremendous. And so our next webinar will be in January 11th. at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. And it will be featuring Alex de Waal, a British anthropologist, human rights activist, and the executive director of the World Peace Foundation at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. He's an authority on famine and has worked on the Horn of Africa, on the Horn of Africa since the 1980s as a researcher and practitioner, and he has published several books on these topics. And we'd also like people to invite people to become more active in the Health Advisory Council. Our website link has been put in the chat several times, so please come there and learn more about us and join one of our working groups. Donate if you can. We appreciate it to keep these webinars going. And, the struggle continues. And thank you so very much today.
Thank you.